The room went quiet when my brother leaned back in his leather chair and smiled at me like I was already defeated. "You'll regret crossing me." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The words carried across the boardroom anyway, slipping into every corner, crawling under the polished oak table, settling into my chest like a dare. Around us, the attorneys froze. One of the junior partners stopped mid-note. Someone cleared their throat too loudly. No one looked at me. Not directly. They looked at him. They always did. I kept my hands folded in my lap so no one would see them shaking. He had practiced that line. I could tell. My brother loved statements that sounded final, like doors slamming shut. He loved saying things in public that he thought would echo later in private, when I was alone and afraid. What he didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that I had already crossed him weeks ago, and he was already standing on the edge of losing everything. I looked down at the buyout documents resting neatly in front of him. My signature was already there. Calm, precise, unemotional. His wasn't. Not yet. "I'm not threatening you," he continued smoothly, glancing around the table to make sure everyone heard him. "I'm just reminding you how this family works." Family. The word tasted bitter, like something spoiled that everyone pretended was still good. This company had been my father's life. His weekends, his missed birthdays and late dinners. And when he died, everyone assumed it would become my brother's. Automatically, unquestioned, inevitable. Because that's how our family worked too. I was the younger sister, the quiet one, the one who stayed after meetings to straighten chairs and refill coffee pitchers. The one who listened while men talked over me and assumed my silence meant weakness. My brother mistook patience for surrender. He slid the papers back toward me with one finger, like they were something dirty. "You really think this is going to end well for you?" he asked. I met his eyes then, just for a second, long enough for him to notice I wasn't flinching. "I think it already has," I said. There was a pause, a subtle one, but I felt it ripple through the room. He laughed. Too fast, too loud. "She's emotional," he said to the lawyers. "Grief does that. Makes people act irrationally." What I didn't realize then was how badly he needed them to believe that. Because if anyone in that room suspected I was in control, if they sensed even a crack in his confidence, everything would unravel faster than he could stop it. The meeting dragged on, dense with legal language and forced politeness. I said very little. I let him talk. I let him posture. I let him remind everyone how generous he was being, how fair, how patient. Every so often, he'd glance at the folder again, as if expecting it to bite him. Finally, when the senior attorney asked if there were any remaining objections, my brother leaned forward. "This is your last chance," he said quietly, just for me. "You walk away now, and I won't destroy you." Destroy. That was his favorite word when he felt cornered. I leaned forward too, close enough that only he could hear me. "You should read page 12 again," I said. His smile faltered just slightly. He flipped the page, irritation flashing across his face. Then confusion. Then something else. Fear. Not enough to stop him. Not yet. He straightened, picked up his pen, and hesitated. The room waited. The power he loved so much pressed down on him, daring him to hesitate longer. He signed. Hard. Aggressively. Like he was punishing the paper. The pen scratched loudly in the silence. The moment it was done, relief flooded his face, followed by smug satisfaction. He pushed the documents back toward the attorney and leaned back again, victorious. I gathered my folder calmly, thanked everyone for their time, walked out without looking back. What my brother didn't know, what he wouldn't understand until it was far too late, was that the pressure he felt in that room wasn't coming from me. It was coming from the walls closing in around him. And as the elevator doors slid shut behind me, I finally let myself breathe. Because the buyout wasn't the end. It was the beginning, and he had no idea what I had already done. The first thing my brother did after signing those papers was call our mother. I knew because my phone buzzed before I'd even reached the parking garage. "What did you do to him? He sounds upset. You should have just let it go." I didn't answer. I slid into my car, closed the door, and sat there with my forehead resting against the steering wheel, letting the cool leather ground me. The building loomed above me, glass, steel, confidence. He thought it belonged to him. What he never checked was how much of it had already slipped through his fingers. 3 weeks earlier, I had been sitting alone in my kitchen at 2 in the morning, surrounded by stacks of documents I wasn't supposed to have. Old contracts, vendor agreements, internal emails forwarded accidentally, carelessly, by people who underestimated me. People always underestimated the quiet ones. I remember the night clearly because my hands had gone numb halfway through reading an email chain dated 6 months before our father died. My brother's name appeared again and again, bolded in the subject lines like a warning no one had wanted to hear. He had been moving money, slowly, quietly, through a shell consultancy registered under a friend's name. It wasn't enough to raise alarms at first, just enough to test the waters. What I didn't realize then was that he'd assumed no one else would ever look closely. Certainly not me. Growing up, he'd always said I wasn't built for business. Too sensitive, too soft, too easily hurt. And I let him believe that because there was safety in being dismissed. While he learned how to dominate a room, I learned how to listen. So when I requested access to the company archives under the guise of settling Dad's unfinished affairs, no one questioned it. Grief made people generous, invisible. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. If my brother stayed in control much longer, the company wouldn't survive, and neither would his reputation. Still, knowledge alone wasn't enough. He had power, lawyers, friends in high places. What I needed was leverage. The next morning after the board meeting, I received an email from him with the subject line, "We're not done." The message itself was short. "Don't get comfortable. You think you want something? I'll let you walk away." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. What he didn't understand was that I didn't walk away from the company. I walked away with it. By noon, his assistant called to ask why certain accounts had been frozen. By 1, 2 suppliers refused to release inventory without revised authorization. By 3, his CFO, requested an emergency meeting.
I watched the chaos unfold from a distance, calm and methodical, like someone observing a storm they'd already mapped. Every move I made had been legal, documented, signed, approved. Page 12. The clause he hadn't read closely enough transferred interim operational authority to me pending final ownership restructuring. A temporary measure, the attorneys had said. Routine. My brother had been too busy feeling insulted to feel suspicious. That afternoon, I met with the CFO alone. He wouldn't meet my eyes at first. His tie was crooked. His voice unsteady. "I didn't know," he said. "I swear." "I know," I replied. And I did. Because fear leaves a specific residue. It smells like desperation and sweat and the quiet realization that someone else is holding the knife. I slid one document across the table. "Read this," I said. He read. Slowly. Twice. Then he swallowed. "What happens now?" he asked. "That depends," I said gently, "on whether you're loyal to a sinking ship or a future." He didn't answer right away. But when he finally did, it was barely above a whisper. "He told me you were emotional," he said. "Unstable." I smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. "That's his favorite mistake," I said. That evening, my brother showed up at my apartment unannounced. He looked different without an audience. Smaller. His confidence frayed at the edges. "You blindsided me," he snapped, pacing my living room. "This isn't over." I poured myself a glass of water and watched him carefully. "It is," I said. "You just don't know it yet." He stopped pacing and turned to me, eyes sharp with something close to panic. "You think a few blocked accounts scare me," he said. "I'll bury you in legal fees." I took a slow sip of water. "Then you should probably stop using company funds to pay your personal consultant," I said softly. The color drained from his face. For the first time in his life, my brother didn't have a comeback. And in that silence, I understood something important. He wasn't afraid of losing the company. He was afraid of being seen. And once that started, there would be no way to stop it. My brother left my apartment without slamming the door. That was how I knew he was scared. He used to slam doors when we were children. Hard, theatrical, like punctuation at the end of an argument he believed he'd won. This time, the door clicked shut carefully, almost respectfully, as if he were afraid any sudden noise might shatter what little control he had left. I didn't move until I heard the elevator descend. Only then did I let my shoulders drop. What I didn't realize that night was how quickly fear turns into fury when pride is involved. By morning, my phone was filled with messages from extended family I hadn't heard from in years. Aunts, cousins, even my father's old business partner, now concerned about my mental state. He's worried about you. This isn't like you. Your brother says you're acting irrationally. It was almost impressive how efficiently he'd mobilized them. He'd always known how to weaponize perception. He didn't need facts when he could control the narrative. So I decided to let him keep talking. I showed up to the office earlier than usual that day. The building was quiet, the halls still echoing with the hum of fluorescent lights warming up. I liked it that way. The truth sounds louder when fewer people are speaking. I went straight to my temporary office, the one he'd once joked I could play pretend CEO in, and locked the door. Then I made my first call. The forensic accountant answered on the second ring. "I think it's time," I said. There was a pause. A deep inhale on the other end. "I was hoping you'd say that," she replied. By mid-morning, my brother stormed into the building. I didn't see him, but I heard him. His voice carried, sharp, demanding, brittle. He was looking for allies, for reassurance, for someone to tell him this was all a misunderstanding. What he found instead was resistance. People hesitated before answering him now. Their eyes flicked away. Conversations stopped when he approached. Power doesn't disappear all at once. It leaks. He finally burst into my office without knocking. "You think you're clever," he snapped, running around behind my back. I didn't look up from my screen right away. I wanted him to feel the imbalance. "I think you're loud when you're afraid," I said. His jaw tightened. "You're tearing this family apart," he said. "Dad would be ashamed." That one landed. I felt it. A dull ache behind my ribs. But I didn't let it show. "What Dad would be ashamed of," I said calmly, "is you using his company as a personal ATM." For a split second, his face went blank. Then he laughed. Too casually. "You don't have proof," he said. I turned my monitor toward him. The spreadsheets glowed cold and undeniable. Dates. Amounts. Patterns. His laughter died. "You went digging," he whispered. "I went listening," I corrected. He took a step back, like the numbers might reach out and grab him. "What do you want?" he asked. The question was smaller than he intended. "I want you to stop pretending this is about me," I said. "This is about you. And how long you've been lying." His eyes darted toward the door. "What if I go to the board?" he said. "Tell them you're unstable. That you're on a vendetta." I leaned back in my chair. "Then they'll ask why an unstable woman uncovered financial discrepancies no one else noticed," I said. "And why you're so desperate to silence her." He stared at me, breathing hard. For the first time, I saw him not as my older brother, not as the shadow that had always loomed over me, but as a man cornered by his own arrogance. "I can fix this," he said suddenly. "I'll reverse the transfers. I'll cooperate. Just stop." The word hung between us. Stop. What he didn't realize was that I had already passed the point of stopping. Because once the mask slips, you can't unsee what's underneath. That afternoon, the forensic accountant began formal proceedings. By evening, the board requested an emergency session. And by night, my brother sent me a message that made my hands go cold. "If you keep going, I won't protect you anymore." I stared at the words, my reflection faint in the darkened screen. Protect me from what? Or from whom? I didn't reply. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about what he was willing to do when the world finally saw him for who he really was. And I was about to find out. The board meeting was scheduled for Friday morning. That gave my brother 3 days. 3 days was dangerous. I learned that the hard way when my building security desk called Thursday evening to ask if I was expecting visitors. No, I said, already standing. By the time I reached the lobby, my brother was there, with our mother. She looked smaller than I remembered. Older. Wrapped in a pale coat she clutched tight around her like armor. He stood beside her, hand on her shoulder, guiding her forward like proof. There she is, he said gently, loudly enough for the guard to hear. I was worried she wouldn't come down. I felt something sharp twist in my chest. Using her was a new line. One I hadn't expected him to cross so openly. Mom, I said softly. What are you doing here? She looked at me with tired eyes. He says you're in trouble, she said. That you're spiraling. I turned to him. You told her that? I asked. He smiled. Warm. Concerned. The mask he saved for outsiders. I told her I'm worried about you, he said. Which I am. We sat in the lobby cafe. My mother between us. Exactly where he wanted her. I don't understand why you're doing this, she said to me. Your father wanted peace between you. My brother nodded solemnly. She's been obsessed, he added. Digging for problems where there aren't any. I felt the old instinct rise, the urge to explain myself, to justify, to be believed. I pushed it down. What did he tell you about the money? I asked her. Her brow furrowed. What money? Of course. He hadn't told her that part. He's under a lot of pressure, she said quickly. People make mistakes. Some mistakes, I said carefully, are patterns. My brother's hand tightened on his coffee cup. Enough, he said sharply. Then softened his tone. This stress isn't good for her. For me, he meant. I looked at my mother and saw fear there. Not of me, but of conflict. Of the idea that her family was unraveling and she was too tired to hold it together. I stood. This isn't the place for this, I said. We'll talk after the board meeting. My brother's smile vanished. There doesn't need to be a board meeting, he said quietly. If you sign a retraction. There it was. The real reason he'd come. I won't, I said. My mother gasped softly. You're choosing this, she asked. Over your own brother? I met her eyes. I'm choosing the truth, I said. Even if it costs me. She looked away. As I walked back to the elevator, I felt their eyes on my back. Judging. Measuring. Hoping I'd crack. I didn't. But that night, someone tried to access my personal email. I knew because the alert popped up while I was brushing my teeth. Unrecognized login attempt. Location. Not far from his house. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. That was when I understood what his message really meant. I won't protect you anymore. He wasn't threatening me directly. He was reminding me of how much he knew. Old secrets. Half-truths. Moments taken out of context. Stories he could twist and leak and poison slowly. He didn't need to prove I was guilty of anything. He only needed to make people doubt me. I called the forensic accountant. Then my lawyer. Then finally, someone I hadn't planned to involve at all. My father's former business partner, the one who'd gone quiet years ago after a falling out no one ever explained. He answered after several rings. I was wondering when you'd call, he said. What do you know? I asked. He exhaled. Enough to end this, he said. But once it starts, there's no going back. I looked at the city lights outside my window. Thought of my mother's tired eyes. My brother's carefully measured cruelty. I know, I said. Friday morning came faster than I wanted. The boardroom filled. Tense. Expectant. My brother arrived late, composed, confident again. like a man who believed he'd regained control. He nodded at me as he took his seat. A warning. The chair cleared her throat. "We're here to address serious concerns," she said. I placed my hands flat on the table. And waited. Because the next words spoken in that room wouldn't come from me. They'd come from the past he thought he'd buried. And I could already feel it rising. The door opened 10 minutes into the meeting. That alone was enough to make several heads turn. My brother stiffened beside me. Just slightly. But I noticed. I always noticed when his body reacted before his mind could catch up. The man who walked in moved slowly, deliberately, like someone who knew the weight of his presence. Gray at the temples now. Older than I remembered from the photographs in my father's study. But unmistakable. My brother's face drained of color. "Apologies for the interruption," the man said calmly. "I was invited." The board chair blinked. "And you are?" He gave a small nod. "Richard Hale. Former partner. Co-founder technically, though that title was erased years ago." Silence pressed down on the room. My brother stood abruptly. "This is inappropriate," he said. "He has no standing here." Richard's eyes flicked to him, cool and steady. "Still allergic to witnesses, I see," he said. A murmur rippled around the table. The board chair hesitated, then gestured toward an empty seat. "You may speak," she said. Richard didn't sit. He placed a thin folder on the table instead. "I didn't come to talk," he said. "I came to finish something your father never had the chance to." My brother laughed, sharp and brittle. "You're disgruntled. Everyone knows why you left." "Yes," Richard said evenly. "Because I refused to sign off on falsified expense reports." The words landed like a dropped plate. I felt my brother's knee jolt against mine under the table. "That's a lie," he snapped. "You were pushed out for incompetence." Richard didn't raise his voice. "I kept copies," he said. "Of everything." He opened the folder. Inside were documents older than the ones I'd found. Early. Foundational. Patterns that stretched back years. Before my father got sick. Before anyone thought to look closely. The board members leaned in. "What you're seeing," Richard continued, "is the beginning of a habit. One that escalated. One your brother perfected." My brother turned to me then, eyes blazing. "You planned this," he hissed. I met his gaze, calm. "What I didn't realize then," I said softly, "was how long you'd been doing it." The chair cleared her throat. "Mr. Hale, why come forward now?" Richard's mouth tightened. "Because I promised your father I would," he said. When he realized too late what was happening. The room went very still. My brother stood again. "This is a setup. She manipulated him. She's trying to steal what's mine." The word mine echoed, ugly and exposed. The chair turned to him. "Sit down." He didn't. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. "I have emails," he said. "Messages that show she's unstable. Vindictive. Acting out of grief." My pulse quickened, but my face didn't change. "Please," I said. "Read them." He hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second. Too long. The chair held out her hand. "If you have evidence, submit it." He swallowed. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that I'd already forwarded every message he was about to weaponize. With context. With timestamps. With annotations that showed how often he'd baited me, needled me, tried to provoke reactions he could later frame as proof. He wasn't the only one who knew how to keep receipts. The chair glanced at the screen. Then at him. "These don't say what you think they say," she said slowly. A bead of sweat traced down his temple. "This meeting is over," he said suddenly. "I'm done entertaining this." "No," the chair replied. "You're not." Security appeared at the door. Not for him yet, but close enough to make the point. Richard closed his folder. "There's more," he said. But I think you've seen enough to understand the scope. The board went into recess. My brother finally sat. He leaned toward me, voice shaking with rage and something close to despair. "You think this ends with me?" he whispered. "You think you walk away clean?" I didn't answer. Because the truth was, I wasn't clean. None of us were. But I was prepared. As the board members filed out, my brother stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, fists tight. For the first time since we were children, he looked lost. And what scared me most wasn't the look on his face. It was the certainty settling into my bones. He wasn't done. Not yet. The recess stretched longer than it should have. Minutes turned into an hour. No one spoke. My brother stared at the table like it had personally betrayed him. I watched his reflection in the glass wall across from us. How his jaw flexed, how his leg bounced, how the mask kept slipping and resetting. This was the part no one warns you about. The waiting. Power doesn't shatter loudly. It fractures in silence, while everyone pretends not to notice. When the board finally returned, the air felt heavier. Decided. The chair didn't sit down right away. "Based on the evidence presented," she said, "we are placing immediate restrictions on executive authority." My brother's head snapped up. "Effective immediately," she continued. "You are relieved of all operational control pending further investigation." The words landed cleanly. Surgical. "This is outrageous," he said, standing again. "You can't do this." "We already have," she replied. Security stepped closer. I felt my heartbeat in my throat, not with triumph, but with something quieter. A deep, aching finality. My brother turned to me then, eyes wild. "You did this," he said. "After everything I did for you." I thought of the years I'd shrunk myself to make him comfortable. Of the dinners where he spoke over me. The meetings where my ideas became his 5 minutes later. "I survived you," I said. "That's not the same thing." He lunged toward me then, not violently, but urgently, like a man reaching for the last solid thing in a collapsing room. Security intervened. As they escorted him out, he twisted around one last time. "This isn't over," he shouted. "You hear me? You'll regret this." The door closed behind him. And just like that, the threat he'd lived by dissolved into empty air. What I didn't expect was the wave of grief that followed. Not for him. For the brother I thought I had. For the family I kept trying to save by sacrificing myself. Richard placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did what your father couldn't," he said quietly. "I don't feel victorious," I admitted. "That's because you're not like him," he replied. The board finalized the interim structure that afternoon. I was asked, formally, carefully, if I would assume temporary leadership until the investigation concluded. Every eye turned to me. I took a breath. "Yes," I said. That evening, my mother called. Her voice trembled. "They say he's being investigated." "Yes," I said. She was quiet for a long moment. "He says you betrayed him." I closed my eyes. "He betrayed all of us," I said gently. She didn't argue. When the call ended, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by the quiet I'd fought so hard for. But peace didn't come immediately. Instead, my phone buzzed with one final message. From an unknown number. "You think you won. But I still know things." I stared at the screen, heart steady now. Because this time, the threat didn't land. There was nothing left he could take that I hadn't already given up. And the truth, fully exposed, had a way of stripping secrets of their power. I deleted the message. Outside, the city moved on. And for the first time in my life, I felt something settle into place. Not revenge. Release. But there was still one act left. One final reckoning. The investigation concluded 6 weeks later. By then, the company no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt quieter, leaner, honest in a way it never had before. People spoke more carefully. Meetings ended without raised voices. Decisions were made without someone needing to dominate the room just to feel important. My brother was absent from all of it. No dramatic resignation. No last speech. Just a formal notice circulated by legal, written in language so precise it stripped him of mythology. Misconduct. Breach of fiduciary duty. Removal with cause. The man who once filled every room left behind only paperwork. I was in my office when the final report landed in my inbox. I didn't open it right away. I already knew what it would say. Richard had warned me gently days earlier. It's thorough, he'd said. There's no room for interpretation. What I didn't realize then was how final would feel. When I did read it, my hands didn't shake. Relief doesn't always come with celebration. Sometimes it arrives like a long exhale you didn't realize you've been holding for decades. My brother tried to call me that night. I let it go to voicemail. He left no message. That silence said more than any threat ever had. Our mother came to see me the following weekend. She stood in my kitchen the way she always had, carefully, like she was afraid of breaking something fragile. "You've changed," she said. "I've stopped shrinking," I replied. She nodded slowly. "I should have protected you more." The admission was quiet. Imperfect. Late. But real. "I know," I said. And for the first time, I meant it without resentment. She asked about him. Where he was staying. What he planned to do next. "I don't know," I said honestly. "And I don't need to." That was the boundary. The clean line I'd never been allowed to draw before. Weeks passed. The board offered me the permanent role. I declined. That surprised them. "I don't want to rule something that cost me myself once," I said. "I want to build something that doesn't require anyone to be small." They understood. Or at least, they respected it. I stayed on in a strategic capacity. Chose my hours. Chose my battles. Chose myself. One afternoon, I ran into my brother unexpectedly. A cafe. Neutral ground. He looked thinner. Older. Stripped of certainty. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he laughed softly. Without humor. "You always were smarter than I gave you credit for," he said. I met his eyes. "And you always confused intimidation with strength," I replied. He looked away first. "I warned you," he muttered. "You crossed me." I thought of the boardroom. The threat. The confidence he'd worn like armor. "I know," I said. "You just didn't realize what side of the line you were standing on." He didn't argue. We parted without drama. No forgiveness. No apology. Just truth standing between us, solid and unmoving. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window, watching the city glow. I thought about all the moments I'd been told to wait my turn. Be patient. Be quieter. Be grateful. And I smiled. Because the greatest revenge wasn't taking anything from him. It was no longer needing his approval to exist. He had warned me I'd regret crossing him. What he never considered was that I'd already lived with regret my entire life. And I was done carrying it for both of us. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.